Hi guys, and welcome back to Mindset Learn Extra Grade 10. And obviously, when you see my face, you know it's life sciences. We are going to move with support in animals, and we break this section into two segments. One is support in animals or support systems in animals 1, which deals specifically with the skeletal system and long bone. And the second segment will deal with the joints and other aspects. What are the key concepts that you need to master in this section? First of all, you need to know the different types of skeletal systems, and they are hydrostatic, exoskeleton, and endoskeleton. You need to know examples of animals that have endo, exo, or hydrostatic skeletons. You also need to know the advantages and disadvantages of each type of skeleton. We then move on to the human skeleton, which forms the bulk of the work in this section. Obviously, we need to know more about ourselves before we learn about others, but at the same time, we learn about others so that we can compare our skeletal system to that of others. And we can see the advantages of ours compared to theirs, and the advantages of theirs compared to ours. In the human skeleton, we look at the axial and the appendicular skeleton. And we move on to the functions of skeletons in general. What do skeletons do for an organism? And lastly, we look at the structure of a long bone. These are the concepts that we are going to be concentrating on in this segment. So relax, sit back, and enjoy this journey that we're going to take through the different types of skeletal systems. We start off with the functions, the general functions of skeletal system. And any skeletal system has three major functions. And that is, it supports the organism, it helps the organism to move, and it can protect internal organs. These are the three major functions of any skeletal system. The three types of skeletons that we have spoken about earlier are the exoskeleton, endoskeleton, and the hydrostatic skeleton. These are the three types of skeletons that we are going to learn more about. Let's start straight away with the first one, and that is the hydrostatic skeleton. Now, being a life science learner, you should know by now, whenever we use the word hydro, it is related to water. So we're talking of a skeleton made up of water. And that's what a hydrostatic skeleton is. First of all, it consists of fluid held in a closed body compartment. That means it is made up of fluid that is found inside the body, in a compartment inside the body. What does it do? It protects the body parts by cushioning them, acting as a shock absorber. Obviously, because of the fluid nature and because these organisms do not have a bony structure, the hydrostatic skeleton will provide shape. And this shape can be changed by contracting muscles in the body wall of an organism. It also provides resistance for muscles to act on. Examples: earthworms. I'm sure most of you have heard about or seen or even used earthworms in different situations. Hydras. These we would not be able to see clearly with the naked eye because they are more microscopic. These are examples of organisms with hydrostatic skeleton. And here we are looking at a lovely specimen of a hydra. How cool would that be if your body could wiggle without any bones? Imagine the tight corners you could get into. But on the other hand, think about that burglar that wants to get through your security gate. If he had a hydrostatic skeleton, all he would do is squeeze through any gate you put in his way. So something to think about. This beautiful diagram, by the way, while we're talking about skeletons, but I see a very beautiful diagram showing something very important in this diagram. Earlier in our lessons, we spoke about mitosis. And we said that mitosis is important for asexual reproduction, sexual reproduction that does not involve the exchange of gametes. What we see on this particular hydra is of important interest to us. This is a form of budding, where a bud forms on the body wall of the hydra, and eventually the bud falls off and becomes a hydra on its own, and it grows to adulthood. So in other words, there's no mate needed for this hydra. From the hydra's body, a new hydra has formed. And if you remember the significance of mitosis, mitosis was exact duplication. That means in mitosis, the cells made copies of themselves. And by the process of budding, the hydra has made a copy of its entire body. How cool is that? And our favorite friend, the earthworm, many of you may remember the earthworm from your fishing expeditions, etc. And the earthworm too has no bones. Inside its body, it has coelomic fluid, which acts as the hydrostatic skeleton and also acts as a center against which the muscles can act. So these are examples of organisms that have hydrostatic skeletons. Exoskeleton, again a life science learner at grade 10 level, should know by now that exo means outside. Outside the body. So a skeleton that is found outside the body is known as the exoskeleton. It is a rigid, a firm, strong external skeleton which can be hard or leathery. Examples of organisms that have exoskeletons are arthropods, and in their case, the exoskeleton is made up of chitin. We spoke about this chitin when we dealt with molecules in our first unit. As you can see, the crab too has an exoskeleton. The endoskeleton, endo in life science, would mean inside. And the endoskeleton is found inside the body. The best example for us would be ourselves. Our skeletons are found inside our body. We will deal more about our skeletons a little later. First of all, it contains hard or leathery supporting elements which are found in a variety of tissues. Most echinoderms, including sea stars or starfish and sea urchins, have an endoskeleton of hard plates beneath their skin. And obviously, vertebrate endoskeletons consist of cartilage or a combination of cartilage and bone. And there's an example of the human endoskeleton, which we will deal with as we go along. Here's a picture of a sea urchin where the skeleton is inside the body. And lastly, we have the starfish, which also has an endoskeleton. So guys, by now we should know the difference between the hydrostatic skeleton, which is a fluid skeleton, which is found inside the body within a compartment. We moved on to exoskeletons, which are hard or leathery and are found outside the body. And then we moved on to endoskeleton, which is a hard or leathery skeleton that is found inside the body. And obviously, you must remember some of those examples. For example, the endoskeleton, we spoke about the humans, the starfish, and the sea urchins. For the hydrostatic skeleton, we looked at the earthworm and hydra as examples. The amoeba too is another example of a hydrostatic skeleton. We can move then to the exoskeleton, where we looked at most of the arthropods that we know have exoskeletons. The types of skeletons and the advantages and disadvantages we need to discuss. You'll notice again, when we're looking at any table that we draw in life science, we will draw columns. Here's our first column going down that way, second column going down that way, and we have some rows going across that way. So in the first column, we talk of the type of skeleton, and the first guy that we stop at is the hydrostatic skeleton. We don't need to explain what a hydrostatic skeleton is, because we've just done that just now. But what are the advantages of a hydrostatic skeleton? First of all, there's no need for specialized structures or tissues. It's simply fluid inside the body. So there's no need for any type of tissue. They don't need to have any specialization to carry out this function. So it's a big advantage, because there's less work for the organisms to do. Secondly, very little energy is needed for locomotion, because the muscles act on the hydrostatic skeleton, and this brings about movement. And because these organisms, some of them in the water, they use the water in the environment or the moisture in the environment to help them to move more easily. What are the disadvantages? Those were the advantages. What are the disadvantages? First of all, obviously, because the skeleton is fluid, the size is limited. It can only grow to a certain size, cannot grow bigger than that. Secondly, it must have a moist habitat to survive. It must either live in water, or it must live in moist soil or any other environment that has a lot of moisture. For example, if you leave the earthworms out without any moisture, they will dry up and die. They need a moist environment. Therefore, they are burrowing animals, and therefore you won't see them moving above the soil surface during the day. They move out of those burrows mainly at night, when it is cooler and the sun's rays are not that intense to dry up their skins for a start, because they need that for gaseous exchange. So that's one other problem. And lastly, the speed at which they can move is limited, because of their small size, and because they are dependent on those little muscles that they have that can act against the hydrostatic skeleton. The speed at which they can move is limited. Let's look at the exoskeleton now, the one that was outside the body. First of all, obviously, if it's outside the body, it will protect the animal. Simple. Anything outside will protect. Secondly, it gives the animal good body support, because it's hard and leathery and it's outside the body. So it's giving it shape and support at the same time. Thirdly, it reduces water loss. Because the organism has an exoskeleton, it will lose less water. Lastly, it provides good leverage for muscle action. Because it's a solid structure now, it is easier for the muscles to act on him. So therefore, it provides good leverage for the muscle action. What are the disadvantages? Because the skeleton is outside, the animal has to get rid of its skeleton in order to grow bigger. So when it is young, it has a particular size of skeleton, and that skeleton does not grow. So when the animal needs to grow, it needs to shed or get rid of that skeleton in order to grow. We call this process molting. So the animal has to molt in order to grow. And obviously, because molting is it's a difficult process, and the animal becomes vulnerable when it is molting, etc., the growth is limited. It can't grow very big. And lastly, movement is limited to the joints. The movement can only be done where there are joints, because the skeleton is outside the body. And we see this in most arthropods. Remember, arthropods have jointed appendages. That's what arthro means jointed, poda means appendages, or actually literally feet. But arthropoda have jointed appendages because the skeleton is outside and they need the joints to allow for movement. That is why that's why that is a disadvantage. Last up is the endoskeleton. Advantage is, firstly, it gives the organism greater flexibility because the skeleton is inside the body. Secondly, the animal can grow much larger than the other types. That means the types that have hydrostatic skeleton and the types that have exoskeletons. It gives good body support and shape, obviously. It protects the internal organs, and it provides more positions for muscle attachment, therefore more power to the muscles, therefore more effective movement. The jobs of the muscle is to work on a skeleton to bring about locomotion, to bring about movement. Therefore, we as humans, for example, have a wide variety of movements that we are capable of. We can swim, we can jump, we can walk, we can run, and yes, some of us think we can fly. But don't try that until you put your Superman costume on. And then too, guys, rather try to fly off the bed, because when you fall, it won't be so far from the ground and small damage can happen. But if you do it from other places, you know what can happen. The disadvantages now. First of all, there's no outside protection. Let's look at our own bodies. We have skin. Outside the skin, we got nothing to protect our skin. The skin is a protector of the inside. So we have an outer covering, the skin, which will have to protect the rest of the body. So to a certain extent, there is no hard outer covering to protect us. Secondly, it does not prevent dehydration. Because the skeleton is on the inside, it can't allow for can't prevent dehydration. And here too, movement is limited to joints. We too have different joints in our body, and without these joints in our body, we too would have been rigid and we wouldn't be able to move. Imagine our body without any joints. You would have just been a frozen stuff like a corpse, and you would have to move that way. Your whole body would move together. Very difficult to move that way, right? And we're going to see how different bones are situated in our body so that we do not have this type of problem. When we study the human skeletal system, we notice that the human skeletal system is made up of two major parts: the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton talks about the bones that lie on the longitudinal axis of the human body. Starting with the skull, with the skull will go the ossicles, the ear bones, the hyoid bone, the ribs, the sternum or breastbone, and the vertebral column. These are the bones that make up the axial skeleton. Just by the way, hyoid bone is a U-shaped bone which is at the back of the neck, to which the tongue is attached. It's a small, tiny bone to which the tongue is attached. The appendicular skeleton, on the other hand, simple, deals with the upper limbs and the lower limbs, plus the girdles. With the upper limbs, we have the pectoral girdle, and with the lower limbs, we have the pelvic girdle. These are the bones of the human skeleton. Guys, we've discussed quite a bit till now the different types of skeleton, the advantages and disadvantages of each, examples of animals that have the different types of skeleton. We have now just begun looking at the bigger part of our section, and that is the human skeleton. And we have just discussed that it's broken down into the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton being made up of the skull, the ossicles, the hyoid bone, ribs, sternum, breastbone, the bones of the vertebral column. And the appendicular skeleton is made up of the lower limbs and the upper limbs. The upper limbs have what we call the pectoral girdle, and the lower limbs have the pelvic girdle. We're going to go into the details of all these bones in a short while. I give you a small break, have some coffee, not Red Bull, have some coffee, and as soon as we get back, we'll continue with the rest of the section. Hi guys, and welcome back to Mindset Learn Extra. I'm sure you had a quick coffee or at least a glass of water, and you're back in action. Your mind is with me, your body is with me, and your concentration is with me. We continue with our learning in terms of the human skeletal system, and we said that the human skeletal system is made up of the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So first stop in our journey would be the axial skeleton. And if you remember, we said that the axial skeleton is made up of the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. We also mentioned a bone, the hyoid bone, which is at the back of the neck to attach the tongue. These are our bones. We notice in this particular diagram, they're giving you the frontal view, and they're giving you the posterior view. So this would be the anterior view, and this would be the posterior view. And yes, if you're wondering, it is a female. But no, unfortunately guys, sorry, no funny stuff here, only bones. Now, let's look at the bones that make up this axial skeleton that we are talking about. I want you at this stage to introduce you to my friend who's right beside me, my tall friend. His name is Mr. Bones. Say hi to Mr. Bones. He says hi to you as well. We're going to use Mr. Bones together with our diagrams to get to the real nitty-gritty of the different bones that make up our skeletal system. And like we said, we are busy at the moment with the axial skeleton. And right on top of the axial skeleton, we have the skull. The skull is made up of the cranium that covers and protects the brain from the top, and the facial bones, as we can see here. And as I indicated earlier, when I did that, the only movable bone in the skull is the lower jaw. Let's look at a close-up diagram of the skull on our screen. We're going to look at a lateral view of the skull. On the top here, we see the cranium. There on the top, we see the cranium. And we'll find that the cranium is made up of a few bones. The first being in front, the frontal bone, obvious. Then on the side, parietal bone. Lower down near the ear region, the temporal bone. And right at the back, the occipital bone. Later in grade 12, when you learn about the brain, then you will know that these correspond to the different lobes in the brain. The brain also has a frontal lobe, a parietal lobe, a temporal lobe, and an occipital lobe. So that is the bone of the cranium that we are seeing. And you notice that the bones are joined with these jagged edges here. We call these sutures. We'll learn more about the sutures in our second segment when we deal with the different types of joints in our body. From there we move on to the facial bones, And the more important facial bones for our study is, first of all, the cheekbone or the zygomatic bone. And on this side, there's a zygomatic bone there, the cheekbone. Some prefer to have a higher cheekbone. Some prefer to have a lower cheekbone. And these days, they're all changing those things to give them a better look, as we may call it. Also on here, we can see on the facial bones, we have the eye sockets. The eye socket is going to be the part which is going to keep the eyes and protect them. Then we have the whole area of the nasal bone. We have the upper jaw and the lower jaw. These are the main bones there. If you see here at the back, I'm going to just turn this guy around for you so that you can see a little rod going there. This rod goes through a hole at the back here known as the foramen magnum. We'll talk more about that a little later. Let's go back to our diagram and give the bones some names. We said that they have nasal bones, and on the inside of the nose or the nasal passage, we have the ethmoid bone. And we also have on the cranium the sphenoid bone. The upper jaw, as you can see, is called the maxilla, and the lower jaw is the mandible. So the mandible is the one that has the ability to move because it fits into the upper part of the skull by condyles. There's a little groove there that it fits into, and it can do that. If somebody hits you hard enough, you are liable to dislocate your jaw even if it moves out of that socket. So those are the bones of the skull. Let's move on. The next up, obviously, in this journey of ours is the vertebral column. As we can see here, the vertebral column is made up of different regions. The first region in the neck area is the cervical vertebrae, and there are 7 of them. 7 bones make up the cervical or the cervical vertebrae. Thereafter, we have the thoracic vertebrae, which are bending backwards. There are 12 of those. Then we move further, we go to the lumbar vertebrae, which are slightly protruding to the inside. And there's 5 bones that make that area up. We move further to this area known as the sacrum, which has 5 fused bones. They are not separate bones, they are all together. And just below that, we have 4 fused coccyx. And yes, guys, coccyx is found in males and females. Let's go back to our friend Mr. Bones. And we can see those bones in this area. Here's the vertebral column running down the cervical area. Then the thoracic one going backwards there. And then the lumbar vertebrae protruding outwards. And the sacrum there inside, you can't see much of it. And the coccyx right at the bottom. Those are the bones of the vertebral column. You'll notice that in the upper areas, up to the lumbar vertebrae, the vertebrae have discs between them. And when we did animal tissue, we spoke about white fibrous cartilaginous discs. And we said one of the locations of those were between the vertebrae, where they act as shock absorbers. As we go further and we talk about problems with the skeletal system in the second segment, we will talk about one such problem when these discs move out of place. So that, people, is the vertebral column. Remember, the vertebral column and the spinal cord are 2 different things. The vertebral column is made up of bone. Spinal cord is made up of nerves. And these nerves run inside the vertebral column. The purpose of the vertebral column is to protect the delicate spinal cord. So when you talk of breaking your back, and if your spinal cord snaps, these are 2 different concepts. And when you get to grade 12 and you talk of the nervous system, you can delve more detail into this. Just remember, vertebral column is made up of bones. The spinal cord itself is made up of nerves, and it runs inside the vertebral column. There's a hollow running through, just like the pole is running through here, the nerves run right through there. More about that when you get to grade 12. We then move still with the axial skeleton and the thorax, and in the thorax we find two important structures, the rib cage and the sternum. And this diagram shows you very clearly the sternum, this area here, that's the sternum. And you'll notice that the sternum is made up of three major areas. The top area here is called the manubrium. Big new word, manubrium. And then this area here is called the body. And the bottom one is called the xiphoid process. X is sounded as Z in this case, the xiphoid process. So the sternum is made up of the manubrium on the top, the body, and the xiphoid process. In terms of the ribs, we have 12 pairs of ribs altogether. 12 pairs of ribs, of which the first 7 pairs are known as true ribs. Number 8, number 9, number 10, the next 3 pairs are known as false ribs. And the last 2, number 11 and number 12, are called floating ribs. Now let's explain why these are called true ribs, these are called false ribs, and why these are called floating ribs. All the ribs, or most of the ribs, are attached in some way to the sternum. If you look at the top here, you will find that the color here and the color there is slightly different. There's a lighter shade of color right through here, there, and all of this here. And you'll notice from numbers 1 through 7, each individual rib is attached by that grayed substance to the sternum individually. This is hyaline cartilage. You should have guessed this from our prior lessons on animal tissue, and when we spoke about hyaline cartilage, we said one of the locations of hyaline cartilage was to connect the ribs to the sternum. So you should have picked that up already. And so each one here, 1 to 7, is attached to the sternum individually. When we look at 7, 8, 9, and 10, you'll notice that they all linking up to 1, and that 1 goes to the sternum. Because they are not individually linked to the sternum, we call them false ribs. And the last 2, very easy, as you can see, they are not attached on both sides. So therefore they are called floating ribs. They are not attached back to the sternum in any way. They are coming only from the vertebral column. Remember, let me just go back, that the one part of the rib cage is attached to the backbone, and the other part of the rib cage is attached in the front, anteriorly, to the sternum. Let's go back to Thomas, or rather Mr. Bones. I give him different names because every time I take him elsewhere, he doesn't like the names that I give him. So I've got to keep changing the names to please him, lest he picks up one of his arms and gives me a one tight smack. I don't want that in studio in front of the whole country. Let's look at the rib cage here on this particular friend of mine. Can you see that each of these ribs have a hyaline cartilage that they are attached on their own, on one side. And if we turn him around, you'll find that the back of the rib cage is attached to the vertebral column. That's what we are talking about there. And these ones here, they are not attached on their own. They are attached via one, and therefore they are false. And the last 2 right at the bottom, these guys have no hyaline cartilage and they are not connected to the sternum. Therefore, they are floating ribs. That is the story of the rib cage. Just remember that the sternum is broken up into manubrium, body, and the xiphoid process. We showed that already in the diagram, manubrium, body, and xiphoid process right at the bottom. And there are 7 true ribs, 1 to 7 in our diagram. There are 3 false ribs, 8, 9, and 10, and 11 and 12, 2 floating ribs. That is the story of the rib cage. Guys, a thing like this, we don't expect you to learn this from big chunks of text. And I've been saying this over and over and over and over again. You can't learn this from big chunks of text material. Here's a diagram. I've shown you a diagram. I've shown you the real thing. Obviously, you cannot see your skeleton. Otherwise, I would have directed you to your own skeleton to learn from there. So, please look at the diagrams, learn the diagrams, name the parts, and practice, practice, and more practice. We move on to the appendicular skeleton. So we finish with the axial skeleton. Just to remind ourselves, axial skeleton was made up of the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. Those are the main actors in that part. We also mentioned the hyoid bone. Mind my tongue twisting all the time. Every time I say hyoid, well, the next word comes out is boin. Mind that. That's something in my brain going wrong. Hyoid bone, right? The one that attaches the tongue. Now we're going to the appendicular skeleton. And close your eyes, it's another female. The appendicular skeleton, very interesting, works with 2 parts. That part, which is known as the pectoral girdle, and this part here, obviously, by now you should know, that is the upper limb. And it is made up of the pelvic girdle, and obviously the lower limbs. Those are the bones in the appendicular skeleton. Let's look at the first part, the upper limbs and the pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle is made up of the scapula or the shoulder blade and the clavicle. A bone going across there, a flat bone going there. This one here, a triangular flat bone bigger than the clavicle. These 2 bones make up the pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle in the clavicle area makes a nice socket into which the head of the long bone in the hand, known as the humerus, and no, that's not funny at all, it's called the humerus. Remember, lots of learners confuse humerus and femur. H for humerus, H for hand. F for femur, F for foot. But it's not in the foot, it's in the leg. We'll worry about that when we get there. So we have the humerus in that area there. Going down further, we have 2 important bones, the radius and the ulna. Now to remember, I say remember RST. Your alphabet, the letters of your alphabet, R, then S, then T. So the radius is in line with the thumb. The radius will be the bone running across here with the thumb. And the ulna will be the bone running with the little finger. UL, ulna, little finger. Just little pointers to help you to remember these things, guys. Going further, we now go to the area of the palms and the rest of it. But before we get to the palms, we obviously get to the wrist. The wrist bones are called carpals. The bones of the hand in this area here, the palm bones, we can say, are known as the metacarpals. And the bones of the finger are called the phalanges. For fingers, phalanges. Go further, we go to the pelvic girdle, and the lower limb. We'll take each of these on their own now. There's the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle is made up of a couple of bones, the ilium, the top part on either side, the ischium, a little bit lower down, and the pubic bones on the inside. Obviously, this part here showing you part of the sacrum that is fitting into the pelvic girdle. In between the pubic bone, we have cartilage that is white fibro cartilage made up what we call the pubic symphysis. There are spaces that are called foramen here, and there is a nice socket found here known as the acetabulum. Those are the bones of the pelvic girdle. We carry on further. We want to compare the male to the female. The first one is the male. You'll notice that it has a narrow pubic arc. In this area here, it is narrow, and it is slightly narrower that way as well. When we get to the female, we'll find that the pelvic girdle is slightly wider, and the pubic arc is also wide. Why? And you can see the reason there, wide birth canal. So that the woman is holding or carrying or is pregnant, then this area must support that baby that she is carrying in her body. Rather, not the baby, let's use the correct terminology, the fetus that she's carrying in her body. So she has a wider birth canal. Now, interestingly, guys, there are some pointers when they find dead bodies, when they want to know whether these bodies were female or male. Pathologists or forensic scientists will look at the bone structure of the skeleton. Let's say this now has decomposed, there's no flesh, there's no other organs that they can see whether this is a female or a male. Something that they found after many years, or some person that has burnt out completely. When they look at the bones, there are certain areas where they look. One of those areas is the pelvic girdle. There are differences in the male and the female. Another area would be the cheekbone areas, and here too the cheekbones in the females are slightly higher up and the males are slightly lower down. But these are all very technical stuff. I'm just giving you a layman's point of view on these two ideas here. Before we move on to the next slide, let's go back to Mr. Bones. He's waiting for us patiently. And remember, we discussed now the pectoral girdle and the upper limbs. And we discussed the pelvic girdle, this one here, and the lower limbs. We'll look at that each on their own. The pectoral girdle is made up of this S-shaped bone here, known as the clavicle, and this guy here, known as the scapula or the shoulder blade. And as I said to you earlier, it has a nice cavity in this area where the head of the humerus fits in nicely. And we're going to look at the significance of this arrangement when we look at joints in our next segment. So this is the long bone of the humerus or the hand, which is known as the humerus. The humerus makes a joint with the radius and ulna. Now, in a diagram, it's very difficult just like that to know which is the radius and the ulna. In your body, it's easy. With the thumb, this bone on this side is the RST, radius is in line with the thumb. And ulna, UL, the ulna is in line with the little finger. Now, we need to look at this particular part carefully to understand in a diagram how we can figure that out. If you look at your fingers, your own fingers. Don't look at mine now. Now look at your own fingers, and you will see that in each finger you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 digits. And in the thumb, you only have 2 digits. So if you're looking at a diagram, you must look at the one that has only 2 digits. And in this case, it will be this fellow here on the side. So in line with that one, in the diagram, RST, and that would be the radius is in line with the thumb. And on this side, 1, 2, 3, the ulna will be on the other side. We move to the wrist bones. These are the carpals. The ones of the palm, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 metacarpals, and then the 14 phalanges. Now, how did I get to 14? 3, 6, 9, 12 plus 2, 14. 3 in each of the other fingers and 2 in the thumb give you 14 phalanges that we have here. So that covers us with the pectoral girdle and the upper limbs. We then move to the pelvic girdle and the lower limbs. I told you earlier that the pelvic girdle is made up of the ilium on the top, the ischium at the bottom, and in the area of the crotch, that area there, that is the pubic bone, and the pubic symphysis in between there. In the female, this area is wider than in the male. Now, just to do a little operation, and please don't try this with your little brother at home. I can do this here, you can't do that. I'm qualified to do this, by the way. And I have asked permission from Mr. Bone's family to take his legs out. We'll put it back. I'm qualified. I can do something like that. The longest bone in the body, the femur. And the femur is followed by the tibia, and the fibula. In this area here, we have the patella, the kneecap. Then we have the tibia and the fibula. Now in the feet, we have a slight difference compared to what we spoke about in the wrist and hands. What happens here, instead of having carpals and metacarpals, we have tarsals. So again, T for toe, T for tarsals, and metatarsals. The design is almost the same. And lastly, we still have digits at the end, and the digits are arranged in the same way in which the digits in your hand are. One modification here is one of the tarsals is a large bone, the heel bone or the calcaneum. And this is a significance because it will give us additional support when we are walking or standing. So those are the bones of the lower limbs. Let's go back to our slides and take it from there. The general functions that we look at of the endoskeleton, for a start, its support framework, supports the body, and obviously protects the softer organs on the inside. And there you got protection again of delicate organs like the heart, like the lungs, and the brain. For example, the rib cage will protect the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the liver, and all of that inside here. That's a protection for all those internal organs. There, the skull protects the brain. Imagine you had no protection of your brain, depending where your brain is. Movement. The bones cause movement because they act as resistance against the muscles. Mineral storage. When we did organic and inorganic compounds, and we spoke about mineral salts. One of those mineral salts that were necessary was calcium. Another one was phosphorus. These minerals, when we take them into our body, they are deposited into the bone. If later in life you're running short of these minerals, they are taken out of the bone and given back into the blood. We will deal with certain disorders because of the shortage of these minerals later in life in our second segment. Lastly, it is also involved in blood cell formation. The yellow bone marrow in the bone, inside the bone, the yellow bone marrow produces blood cells, and that's an important function of the bones. If the bones do not produce the blood, we will not be able to replenish our blood supply in our body. We move on to the different types of bones that we have in our body. And as we have mentioned, we have some long bones. Here's an example of a long bone, the femur. Another example of a long bone is the humerus. Okay? The short bones are the carpals and the tarsals. Flat bones, the rib, scapula, skull, sternum. The skull, the flat bone is this one here, the cranium. Irregular bones, that means bones that have no regular shape, are the bones of the vertebrae and some of the facial bones. I just want to make a slight correction on the long bones. The phalanges are not long bones, and metacarpals and metatarsals are not long bones. So it's the humerus, the ulna, the radius, the tibia, the fibula, and the femur. These are the long bones. Guys, we have gone through the entire human skeleton, across from the top, the cranium, right to the little toe, and everything in between. And I'm sure that is a lot of information. And I'm sure by now your mouths are dry. You want to run quickly to the kitchen and get some goodies to have a short break. I catch you after the break. Hi guys, and welcome back to Mindset Learn Extra Grade 10. I'm sure you enjoyed that break because we learned about a host of bones there. Don't let these bones haunt you at night. We now move on to taking one of those bones and learning about the makeup of this particular bone. And the bone that we look at is the long bone. And yes, if you're at home and when you have chicken at home, and if you're stuck with the leg, lots of people like the leg, but most youngsters today would like to go for the white meat, the softer meat. So some people in the house are stuck with the long bone of the leg. That leg represents a long bone in the chicken. Obviously, it's not long as your long bone of your femur, but it's a long bone nonetheless. We are going to look at the structure of this long bone. The one that I'm using here in front of me now is the long bone of the humerus, the one of your upper arm. You'll notice that the bone has two heads and a shaft between it. It has two heads and a shaft between it. We're going to look at a detailed diagram to show what makes this particular bone the way it is. Let's go and look at that diagram. If we look at the anatomy of a long bone, we'll find that it has two heads, as I said, and the heads are called epiphyses on both sides, on both ends, and there's a shaft in between this, and that is called the diaphysis. Now, if we take this particular bone, and for example, we take this area and we cut it and we make a cross section and we make a detailed internal analysis, this is what we will see. On the outside, what we see on the outside, here's the white there on the outside, is known as the periosteum. It's made up of thick, hard connective tissue that covers and protects the bone. If we peel away the periosteum, we'll find a thicker layer of endosteum. And running inside this endosteum is the yellow bone marrow. Remember, we spoke about earlier, the yellow bone marrow produces the red blood cells. It is also a good source for stem cells. The yellow bone marrow is a good source for stem cells. When we discussed stem cells in prior lessons, in the sense of mitosis, and we spoke about the use of stem cells, we said that we can get, in adults, we can get stem cells from yellow bone marrow. And obviously, because it's bone and because it has living cells, it must have a blood supply and a nerve supply. If your bone breaks, obviously you're going to feel pain. And the bone cells right inside this hard structure are osteocytes, the bone cells, which are living cells, and they need nourishment. So they must get some form of nourishment. So that is the story of the bone. Also, to take further, on the ends, generally, we have spongy bone, and the shaft is made up of compact bone. We're going to learn more about compact bone and spongy bone when we discuss the second segment of this section. For now, you must be able to draw and label this diagram, or if we give you a diagram in the exam, you must be able to label the different parts. And it's not a difficult diagram to learn. Straightforward, the two heads are called epiphysis, proximal on the top, distal at the bottom, and the shaft is called the diaphysis. The bone itself is covered, the outer covering is called the periosteum. Just beneath that is the endosteum, and beneath that is the yellow marrow. We said the heads generally are made of spongy bone, and the shaft especially is made up of compact bone to give the bone strength so it doesn't break easily. I'm hoping you got that. Guys, it's time to look at some questions now. The first question says, explain 3 functions of the skeletal system. And what's the verb? I've been talking about this all the time. The verb tells you what to do. This verb says explain. It did not say state. You can't say locomotion. You can't say support. You've got to explain these 3 functions. So let's explain the 3 functions. The first function would be 1, and we can talk about support, and we can say either the fluid, because they did not say the human skeletal system, they said the skeletal system. Either the fluid or the bone or other leathery substance helps to support the body. 2, locomotion. How does it do that? It provides resistance against which muscles will act. In some cases, it may even give shape to the organism, and this especially with all the types of skeletons, they give shape because of the different nature. You can discuss about hydrostatic here, you can talk about endo, and you can talk about exoskeleton. 4, to add one more, protection. and especially with endoskeletons and exoskeletons, they give a degree of protection. For example, in the endoskeleton, we just learned it protects some internal organs like the heart, the lungs, etc. So these are 4 functions. We can also talk about the human skeleton, where the skeleton or the bones produce blood, and you can discuss that even further. I've just given you a skeleton of 5. Mind the pun on skeleton while we're talking about the skeletal system, but I've given you 5. There are many more functions that we discussed earlier of the skeletal system. But remember, when you have to explain, you have to give a statement and you have to elaborate on that statement. When you do that, you would get the 2 marks. Generally, a question like this where it says explain, you would get 6 marks for 3. So 1 for the statement and 1 for the explanation of that. Question 2, a table question. It says complete the table below. Very simple table. On the one hand, they're giving you the bones of the skeleton, and I like to say, instead of saying on the one hand, I'd like to say on the first column. On the first column, they give you the bones of the skeleton, and on the second skeleton, they want you to say whether it is part of the axial or part of the appendicular skeleton. They give you numbers in the different rows, 1 to 6, and they want you to say whether each of these parts belong to the axial or the appendicular skeleton. Very simple. The tarsals, T for tarsals, T for toes, and where we found that in the appendicular skeleton. The vertebrae or the vertebral column is found in the axial skeleton. A rib cage, yep, you got it right, axial skeleton. Scapula, or another name for scapula, by the way, shoulder girdle, or shoulder blade rather. Shoulder blade. And the scapula is found in the pectoral girdle, and if it's found in the pectoral girdle, it would be appendicular skeleton. The pelvis is formed as part of the pelvic girdle, and therefore it is also part of the appendicular skeleton. Simple. The mandible, you see, why it's important to learn proper terminology? We only talk of jaws, and here they're talking of the mandible. This is part of the jaw, and the jaw is part of the skull and the facial bones, and therefore it belongs to the axial skeleton. Remember, you do not need to redraw this graph, this table, sorry. You need to write down in your answer book numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and next to each you simply write your answers down, and that's how you get to this particular question. Question 3. Now here it gets a bit complicated. It gives you a diagram and it asks you to do different things. So let's look at the diagram. And as you can see, the diagram is that of the rib and the sternum, the rib cage and the sternum. Remember guys, it's important when you're looking at diagram, when I tell you, study the diagram and answer the question. Look at the diagram and figure out what is it representing. This one here clearly, anybody should know that, represents the rib cage and the sternum. Where does this fit into? Remember, you're not going to get this question only after you've done the skeletal system. You may get the same question at the end of the year, after you've done the entire curriculum, and you didn't only do the skeletal system. So anything doesn't belong to the skeletal system. So when you look at a diagram, firstly identify this diagram in your head. Figure it out, what diagram is, what are they showing here? Secondly, where does it belong? This one here belongs with support system and this belongs to the human skeletal system, and you can go one step further to say that this belongs to the axial skeletal system. So that's the first part. Now we start looking at the question. So we look at a diagram. If there's any further instructions, this one was clear. You just talk about, study the diagram and answer the questions. So there's no big instructions. They just say identify parts 2, 4, and 5. Now we go to the diagram. Parts 2, 4, and 5 are all on this bone here. And this bone is the, got it? Sternum, obviously. And we said that the sternum is made up of 3 parts. These 3 parts are, the top one, number 2, is the manubrium, that big word. The second part, number 4, is the body. And the third little extension right at the end is known as the xiphoid process. These are the 3 bones that make up the sternum. We're still busy with the same diagram. What is the function of structure labeled 8? Now we need to go to the diagram, look for structure number 8. And there's 8 there. And structure number 8 is talking about these guys here that we said earlier in our discussion are the structures that are not the rib bone, but there are other structures that are found there, and these structures are hyaline cartilage. But they did not ask you what the structure is, they asked you what the function of the structure is. And the function of the structure is to attach the ribs to the sternum. The function of the hyaline cartilage is to attach the rib to the sternum, as we can see very clearly in the diagram. There's the ribs, and there's the cartilage, and it's attaching it to the sternum. We go further. Why are the parts labeled 10 referred to as false ribs? Let's go back down the diagram. There's 10 here. 10 is talking about ribs number 8, 9, and 10. And why are they not known as true ribs? We distinguish between 3 types of ribs when we discussed the rib cage. We spoke about true ribs, 7 of them. We spoke about false ribs, 3 pairs, 7 pairs, 3 pairs. And we spoke about floating ribs, 2 pairs. The 8, 9, and 10 are not true ribs because they are not directly connected to the sternum via an individual hyaline cartilage. Rather, they are attached to a particular hyaline cartilage together, and this hyaline cartilage will connect to the sternum. So therefore, 8, 9, and 10 are known as false ribs because they are connected to one hyaline cartilage, and this hyaline cartilage takes all of them and connects them to the sternum. Good. And we continue. Now, this is a different question. Instead of asking you to label something, they're telling you, they're giving you the label, and they're asking you for the numbers. Now, please be very careful in these cases. This one says provide the numbers, and in your answer book you will write 3.4 A, and you're going to provide the numbers of the floating ribs. Remember, the floating ribs are those ribs that are not attached to the sternum in any way. And if we go down, we will find that those are number 11 and 12. Altogether, they one big 11, sorry. So we can give 11. Here now the examiners will have a hard time marking because there are 2 numbers there. Normally these would be given in letters and the others will be given in numbers. Here they gave you 2 numbers, so they would have had to accept if you said 11 or if you said 11 and 12. And they also want to know the number of the sternum, which number represents the sternum. We looked at the sternum just now, and we can see that 2, 3, 4, 5. They all belong to the sternum, and there's one big curly bracket here, number 6. So the answer here would be 3.4b, number 6. Now remember guys, this particular diagram is simply dealing with the rib cage, and they're asking you the questions. They can ask this type of question on any part of the skeletal system. For example, they could give you this particular set of bones, and they could ask you to label 1, label 2, label 3, label 4, label 5, and so on and so on. And when you complete the segment 2, when you're talking about joints, in this particular diagram, there are also particular types of joints, so they can ask you questions on that. So you must know that as well. Remember, they can ask you from anywhere around here. Anything. They can give you the skull. They can give you any more of these structures. Question 4. Again, I just spoke about it, and here it appears. Question 4, 4.1. Provide labels for the parts A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, and D. We spoke about this, and by looking at this diagram, do you think this is the foot or the hand? What is the clue? Look at the diagram. This area here is the clue. The hand doesn't have such big bones at the back. It is only the foot that has these bones at the back in this way, especially D. So let's look at A first. A is where? In the front end. So A would be a digit. B would be a T for toe, T for tarsal. B would be metatarsal. Sorry about that. C would be the tarsals. And D would be the calcaneum. By the way, that little slip-up of mine when I gave you tarsal is a typical slip-up that you can make when you are writing your exam. Because you want to rush through the thing, you will write it. So that's the important thing. When you go back and check your work, look at it again and see, and you'll find out that I picked it up quickly. You may not, because you're under stress. I'm not under stress at the moment. You can be under stress in the exams, and that can cause problems. So be very careful and give yourself time at the end to just go through very quickly your answers, especially where you're labeling diagrams or whether you have to give letters or numbers for things. Be careful that you did not write the wrong thing. So give your time, even if you finish early, go through your paper. There is no first prize for giving in handing in your script first. There's no prize, no trophy, no extra 10 marks. Nobody is going to give you any extra marks. So you take your time. You got 1.5 hour or 2.5 hour at the end of the year. 2.5 hours you got for 150 marks. It's adequate time to read the paper before, read all the instructions, answer the questions, and go back to check your work. Don't rush to get out first in the class. There is no prize for that. So we have labeled these different bones. The next one says, in which region, 1 or 2, would you find the little toe? Provide a reason for your answer. So where are you going to find the little toe? Now you've got to be a little scientific. You need to look at the diagram, and you need to look at the bones. Remember, the big toe has 2 digits and the little toe has 3 digits. Thereby 1, there's your metatarsals end there. There's 1, 2. Go down here, it's 1, 2, and 3. So the answer would be 2. The little toe is in region 2 because it has 3 digits and not 2 digits. And that, guys, brings us to the end of our questioning. And remember what I said? It can be any diagram that they can give you. We have chosen to look at the rib cage and the sternum, and we looked at the foot. It could be the hand, it could be the whole of the shoulder, girdle, and the upper limbs. It could be the skull, it could be the vertebral column. The idea is you're given a diagram and you ask questions related to that diagram. So, bottom line, know the diagram of the skeletal system before you go into the exam section. So make sure that you prepare well. As I say, proper planning prevents poor performance. The 5 P's. Proper planning prevents poor performance. So if you plan well, you are definitely going to get good results. I wish you all the best in this section, and I'm hoping that you learned something here today. But the most important thing now is what you've learned here today, put into practice, go to your textbook, go to your question papers, answer questions that are related to the skeletal system. If you can answer those questions, then you have indeed benefited from our interaction. If you cannot, then there's a problem. Then look at it again somehow, record it, look at it again, and see if you can. Or go to your textbooks, look at the diagrams and learn from there. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much. And till next time, hang in there.